Today's community presentation is a special conversation with Hank Willis Thomas and Michelle Wu, the co-founders of Four Freedoms, an artist collective that centers art and creativity as a catalyst for transformative connection and collective liberation. And you know, Bandung is all about that. So I couldn't be any more excited about this conversation and to have them here with us. Welcome. Thank you, guests and our attendees for being here. If you have any comments, feel free to use the chat. If you want to share love, excitement, feel free to use that function. But if you want to post questions, we ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen there. Yes, and we will get to those questions. We'll answer those questions during the latter half of the conversation. But for accessibility, I'm going to describe myself. I am a Black woman with a short afro, wearing a white t-shirt and green and yellow alekes and red lipstick in front of a gray wall. And before we begin, I will also start with the land acknowledgement. MoCADA and A4 stand in honor of the first inhabitants and our ancestors. We acknowledge the land on which we stand, the original homeland of the Lenape and Canarsie people, and the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We honor the generations of stewards, and we pay our respects to the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Ashe. On that note, I will pass the mic to Lisa.
Thank you, Amy. For a quick accessibility check, I am a Hapa, half white, half Korean woman wearing a zigzag and crocheted sweater in front of a window with shoulder length grayish hair. Thank you all. I'm so excited to introduce our featured presenters tonight. Hank Willis Thomas needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Hank's work is everywhere. I just have to say, like over the past 3 days, I've encountered Hank's work like at a book fair, at an art fair, on the promenade. Hank's work is everywhere. He lives and works in Brooklyn as a conceptual artist, working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work has been exhibited throughout the United States and around the world. Some of his collaborative projects include Question Bridge, which I loved. I also got to get inside of that. Question Bridge, Black Males in Search of the Truth Booth, the Writing on the Wall, and Four Freedoms. In 2017, Four Freedoms was awarded the ICP Infinity Award for New Media and Online Platform. Hank is a recipient of the Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the AIMIA AGO Photography Prize, the Soros Equality Fellowship, Aperture West Book Prize, and many, many other honors and awards, as well as being a member of the Public Design Commission for the City of New York. And you may also have heard of him recently as the artist behind the Embrace on Boston Common, a monument to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. So I could go on, but I won't, because I would like to introduce Michelle Wu. And Michelle is a cultural producer, an art historian, and a curator based in Los Angeles. She is a co-founder of Four Freedoms, and her diverse roles there include strategy and design of national campaigns, public art initiatives, exhibitions, and programming. And she also advises artists and arts organizations on business management and cultural strategy. And A4 was very fortunate to have Michelle as a presenter at our town hall on arts as civic engagement way back in 2020. So that was great. So I am going to turn it over to Hank and Michelle now, who are going to talk a little bit about their practice, about Four Freedoms, how they got started, how they came together, and what they're doing. So I give it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hank, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I did forget to ask the one obvious question, which is, should I share my screen?
Take it away.
Well, where do we begin, though?
Should we start at the beginning?
Okay. So about 10 years ago, we met 10 years ago, like 2 months from now, we met, and you were applying for a job at my studio to become studio manager, and we worked together in that capacity for 4 years. And somewhere in the midst of that, we realized that it was a better kind of opportunity for us, which was to kind of really fulfill some of our collective goals through social practice. And in 2016, along with Eric Gaddis Benoit Gallery and Joanna Bellarado Samuels, we co-founded For Freedoms, a super PAC dedicated to art and civic engagement and the role of putting critical discourse into political discourse. So that's my story. What's your story?
I thought that was a very concise summary. Yeah,
For
it was. So for those of you who are new to our work, this was actually meant to be a one-year project in 2016 ahead of the general election. Of course, we all recall what happened during that election. And I think we were excited by the response we received, not just to the work, but how eager and how hungry people were to participate, how much people felt left out of the conversation, and the power of art as a pathway to participate. And so we accidentally became an organization because of all of this excitement. And I think the thing that really sticks with me and still inspires me about working with you is the fact that that project in 2016 was really born out of us just calling everybody we knew. So we really were just, doing kind of old school, traditional grassroots organizing, calling everybody in our Rolodex and saying, hey, we're going to do this crazy thing. Do you want to be a part of it? So there was, no blueprint for what we were doing, which made it exciting, and we could kind of shape it into whatever we wanted. There was a lot of freedom in that. Hank, you're on mute.
It's saying, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, good. I forgot about how to work Zoom. But I'm saying that this was our kind of, in 2016, we really started our campaign, or our first series of projects with For Freedoms is doing billboards. And this was a billboard that we did in November 2016, actually before Election Day, which said, "Make America Great Again." It was in Memphis, not in Memphis, in Mississippi, in Pearl, Mississippi, in the location on the same highway, Route 80, that the historic Selma to Montgomery March happened in 1965 in Alabama. And we realized that on that same road, this is an event that took place where the John Lewis and several civil rights activists faced down the Alabama state troopers who were attempting to limit the scope of their participation in democracy. And this was, I think, when we heard the term "Make America Great Again," the question was, when was "quote unquote" America ever greater than it was in moments like this, when everyday ordinary citizens stood up against the injustice of the government for, in peace, nonviolence, and through dignity and love of community, actually made incredible civic change. So then in that year, we worked with artists like Trevor Padman, and I think a lot of our thesis was that there's so much public space that's dedicated to selling stuff. Most of the art that we see in public space is doing that, but we wanted to figure out what it would look like to do political speech through the lens of an artist's practice in a way that actually we talk about good art asking questions and good design answering them, and realizing that through the work of artists like Carrie McWeems, perhaps we can touch on something much deeper than we could have otherwise. Or Zoe Buckman with this powerful billboard. And then what happened, Michelle?
Well, I'll just add that, it was this organization, I guess, is really born out of friendship and collaboration and what it looks like to lean on others, but also be support to others. And I think those of us who can recall that year in the lead up to the election, I mean, things were feeling quite tense, quite divisive. It was almost as if we were kind of looking into the future. And I think we were worried. And we didn't really see a space for creative people to participate in the conversation. And we asked ourselves, why aren't artists playing a more integral role in shaping public discourse, in shaping our political system? And how do we sort of leverage our communities, our skills, our experience as creators, as producers, to get people excited again, to get people to care about their role in society in a new way. And so after 2016, again, we were kind of riding on that high from our project year and, thinking about ways that art can really spark excitement, care, nuance, and complexity to an otherwise really dull, but also really, violent and a violent landscape that was not inclusive of most people.
So over the course of in 2018, we decided to take it a step further, and rather than doing a single billboard, a few billboards, we decided to collaborate on what we believe is the largest creative collaboration geographically in the country, where we had over 50 artists do 50 billboards in all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico, and also collaborated with over 120 institutions to do town halls, exhibitions, and different public activations. And this was really a way to kind of call different artists, but also different organizations, and even the billboard companies into play, into conversation about how we can complicate the discourse that's happening in public space through what we as artists do inherently in our work.
Yeah, and to accompany these billboards, we also co-organized and produced exhibitions, what we call town halls, which are really just artist-led forums for public dialogue. We held them in all 50 states, including DC and Puerto Rico, as a way to lend support and amplification to work that was important and already being done, but also trying to create an umbrella under which we can have a more collective conversation.
And just remember that this billboard is actually a billboard that was designed by Mike Mandel and my professor, Larry Sultan, who actually we were able to exhibit this after Larry passed away, but it said, "Whose news abuses you?" And this was a series of billboards that they did in the 1970s that as kind of artists in kind of guerrilla intervention. And so it was really powerful to really present artist work that had kind of already had a lifetime or again, and there's something about like reimagining what public space could be and also what curated space could be that this 2018 campaign really did for us. And it goes on and on forever. And it's crazy to really look back at what we were able to be a part of through the generosity and through the hard work of so many artists and arts institutions and activists, as well as art administrators. I just, the story hasn't this story hasn't been written yet. What's the other way to read this? His story has been written. Wow. But yeah, so I seeing this work again in the context after the pandemic, was pretty heavy, because this billboard by collaborator Eric Gottesman was like the question on our mind for so long. Where do we go from here? And it's inspired by Martin Luther King's final book and an iconic speech, "Where do we go from here, chaos or community?" which was kind of his last kind of message to us. And really, there was a level of criticality, but also, I think, ambition that we can do more than just kind of react and protest, and perhaps that we can insert new images and new visions and through new messages into society that may not have like immediate change or immediate response. That's me showing the slides because there's like 1.5 billion. So I'm like, I don't know how to like get through it all. And I'm just showing you the billboards, because what we've done was so much more than just billboards.
What's great about it too is that, there was stuff that we were curating, directly, but there was dozens, if maybe not even hundreds, of activations that were occurring that we learned about after the fact, that were created and produced by people who were simply excited about what we were doing and wanted to participate in the conversation. And it eventually led us to a convening right before the pandemic, where we got to meet a lot of our partners and collaborators in person for the first time. And I think something that's been kind of key to our work is, of course, doing these projects, creating these campaigns, but also kind of incubating these models for civic action and giving them away. And I think there are a lot of people who want to engage, who are creating and doing really amazing work, but sometimes, don't have the community around them that is needed, to sustain this kind of work. And to drive more attention to the issues that they're focused on. So it's a lot of what we do is about, that model making, right? That people can take these ideas and adapt them and run with them and make them into their own.
Another major thing that we did was we reimagined Norman Rockwell's 4 Freedoms, which were inspired by Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 1941 State of the Union address, where he said everyone in the world was entitled to 4 basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. And we recognized that in the Rockwell illustrations, the idea of who a person was, and especially who American was, didn't necessarily look like most of the people that we knew, and even the way that the United States looked then. And so we wanted to revisit the freedom from worship image, and are able to even have one of these images you can see here on the cover of Time magazine, to really complicate the notion of who has something to say, and who are the citizens. And so we were excited to get to show these on the outside of Federal Hall, which is the oldest which is on the site of the original capital of the United States government, in front of a statue of George Washington. And these kind of ways in which, as art, we can kind of put things into the public and messages into the public that actually challenges the notion of truth, challenges the notion of freedom, what's important, who's important, is like something that my babies hear me. But did you want to talk about this, Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you're saying really quick, that I think a lot of the work too is about like encouraging people to recognize the creativity and sort of the innate artist within themselves. And a lot of folks we've worked with, you know, from arts administrators to historians to designers, folks who don't really think of themselves typically as artists, were, you know, after collaborating with us on different things, I think started to see themselves differently. And I think that's really sort of the magic of creative collaboration.
You proud of this campaign?
Yeah. So we also did an AAPI solidarity campaign in 2021. I think it was 2021 at this point. And again, it was just kind of born out of a feeling of loss and grief and anger and fear about what was happening within our communities at the time. This was right after the shootings in Atlanta. And I just started calling people, asking how they were doing. And we decided we wanted to do something about it. So we gathered a bunch of our artist friends and created artwork in support of solidarity. And we collaborated with the May 19th Project, which is a multimedia project inspired by the joint birthdays of Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X. This was spearheaded by the incredible director-producer Renee Tajima Pena, Karen Ishizuka, who's a mentor of mine, and Jeff Chang, who's a writer, a critic. And then we worked closely too with Malcolm and Yuri's family.
And so I feel like there's a question, I see a question below that says, what are some of the biggest challenges that we faced? You can see, like, this is a billboard that I did, said love over rules. I think the other one said all lives matter, which was in Ferguson, Missouri. But strangely, we've struggled more than anything in defining who we are and what we do, because For Freedoms does not have limitations or boundaries. I mean, we're not attempting to be, I think all of our lives, I think I would say both you and I, Michelle, but I would say almost everyone is working to like get out of whatever box that we're put in. And that when we created For Freedoms, it was really because we wanted to be expansive. We wanted to be for freedoms that we didn't necessarily agree with or understand, or that may not be relevant yet, because we realize that part of being a human being is growing, evolving, and changing, and sometimes changing back. And so putting a scope around something that is infinite so that others can clearly articulate it has been, I think, a major challenge. But all the while, we've collected various collaborators and mischief makers to do whatever it is that we felt like we could, to do things that are exciting, which include, you know, ultimately, you know, the Embrace, which is really an outcome of the work that we were doing with For Freedoms, and attempting to find ways to put the public in public space. And this was a show that we did at the Parish Museum. And so, yeah, I think that's something that comes a lot. comes up a lot.
Yeah, and I would just add that like collaboration is really hard, especially when you're making something that is emergent, right? That is sort of hard to qualify in traditional ways, hard to quantify even. There are a lot of people who have worked with us who still don't really know what we do, which I think is funny. But yeah, collaboration is it's really messy, you know, and it's a constant opportunity to practice the values that we espouse. And they're not, you know, it isn't always easy. It isn't always smooth. Everybody has ideas.
life.
Everybody is right. Exactly. Everybody has lived experiences that they're bringing. But the exciting part is just all the different connections that you make that you might not otherwise make. And also seeing things come to life that seemed like crazy ideas that people told us not to do. They were like, that, don't do that. Like, don't start a super PAC. And the person who actually said that is one of our closest friends who is now the ED of our nonprofit. So she's also an attorney, by the way.
Yeah, and so a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from people who are not artists and organizers or narrative change makers has been like, you have to have a plan before you do anything. You have to be able to like articulate it right so you can get the right funding. You have to have the right metrics so that people can tell that you're having an impact and measure that impact. And I would say that is an area where we could stand to listen better. But whenever we try to do something someone else's way, we wind up not doing anything and just spend more time talking about it. You know, we were able to work with Vital Voices and a group of Iranian activists from around the world in this campaign that was connected to Women, Life, Freedom, that where we convinced For Freedoms Park to allow us to do an installation with the artist JR and Shirin Nishat in a matter of weeks. And we were able to raise money for it and pull out an ad in the New York Times, which are things that we could never have done had we planned for it or thought it through. And so like, I think we challenge ourselves, but also challenge viewers as well as the artists we work with and the organizations to reimagine who they are and what their work is and how it functions in society. You know, this town hall with people who were all artists who were, or not all artists, but artists and activists who were incarcerated for several years and at Pioneer Works, or this residency at Brooklyn Museum, which is a pilot for our news channel, or even a collaboration with Converse that was dedicated to Black femme creatives in LA, Hear Her Here, which is ongoing.
Yeah, I think another thing that I think has been really integral to the work too is, you know, take the AAPI Solidarity Project as an example, which was, you know, kind of an organic collaboration between For Freedoms and an incredible educator and artist named Aaron Yoshi, who's also based in LA. You know, Aaron and I, again, started kind of calling folks within our network. We realized that another cohort of artists were working on a project already. So how do we marry the projects in a way, but also keep them distinct? How do we lend support to each other's projects while still making sure that people are feeling valued and seen? And again, just kind of like, I feel like collaborating is always a really, it's a really important test around how you kind of show up and support others in the process of making art.
And can you, Michelle, introduce what was kind of our breakthrough in 2020?
Yeah, sure. So as you recall, 2020 was a pretty life-changing year for many people. You know, the world was turned upside down. We hit pause on everything that we were doing. We had just come out of, like I said, meeting with our partners and collaborators for the first time in person. We were in lockdown about 14 days later. And we just started to ask ourselves, you know, why are we doing this? And what are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for? And sort of out of these conversations, you know, all isolated in our homes over Zoom, we sort of created the new 4 freedoms, which are listening, healing, awakening, and justice. And they really serve as anchors to how we're thinking about all the various distinct projects that we're working on. But it's also a bit of a North Star for us whenever we're feeling stuck or aren't sure where to go. And out of the sort of creation of these new 4 freedoms, or the birth of these new 4 freedoms, we created the Infinite Playbook, which Hank has up on display. And it really was, you know, it was a way for us to talk about the things that were important to us and the things that we were struggling with and the things that we were practicing internally as friends, as collaborators, as artists. And we, you know, we wanted to bring folks together in spite of what was going on in the world. So this was our invitation to keep going and to continue playing.
And then I think another thing that happened, we were introduced to this concept of the infinite game by James Carse, and this framework where he said that there are 2 types of games. There are finite games where a game comes to end when there is a winner or a loser, and that there are infinite games, which the object of an infinite game is to continue to be in a state of play. And I realized that in a way, life is an infinite game. And so we started to talk a lot about what within our work as 4 freedoms, what that would look like if we framed it as an infinite game. And one of the things that we came up with after a lot of consternation were that if it were a game, I guess in order to invite other people into play, we would have to create rules. And so we created 4 rules for the infinite game. And I'd like to read these. I'll read 1, you read 2, I read 3, you read 4, Michelle.
Yep.
Okay, rule number 1, no one plays alone. You know nothing you need to know. The rules always change. Love overrules.
There are no gatekeepers. Bring people into play. Be where you are. Carry your own trash.
Number 3, learn from feeling. Let love quiet fear. Nourish joy. Go there.
You're just in time. Leap before you look. You know everything you need to know. Together we are awake. Play
And
on,
seriously,
player.
Don't take yourself seriously. And seriously, don't take yourself too seriously. Play on, play it. This idea of like, these actually have, for me, I'm curious how your relationship is to them 3 years later, Michelle. But while we've created other frameworks for this, like these rules are the rules I come back to all the time.
Too loud, I need to find this.
What'd you say?
Oh, this is Justine. I was just going to give you a 5-minute warning.
Great,
Perfect.
thank you, Justine.
Like the rule number 1 stating that I know everything and I know nothing that I need to know in order to get started to play. And then rule number 4 being that I know everything I need to know in order to play. That's like the answer to almost all my questions in life.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I also come back to them all the time. And I think when we created these quote unquote rules of play, it made me realize that yes, what you create is important, but how you create it is almost as important, if not more important. And for me, in the theme of awakening, they are constant reminders, right? To keep your eyes open and to see things for what they really are. And that can be difficult to do in day-to-day life. You get distracted and bogged down and, you're worried about the past, worried about the future. And so it's going back to them has almost become a kind of ritual for me.
And then insisting on the future.
Yeah.
To provoke bigger questions. So even like for us, the game is trying to figure out why we're playing it, right? And while it expands and while there are people who are discouraging and we either convince them to join the bandwagon or we just ride with whoever's there. So the Wide Awakes was in a way an offshoot of the Four Freedoms work that we were doing as a way to kind of invite people who are skeptical of Four Freedoms in to play with us under a different name.
That's usually how we handle questions, challenges, criticisms. We invite them in.
Yeah, it's like maybe usually the person with the question may often have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think, Michelle, did you want to talk at all about Soul or the current show that's up at Photographiska?
Sure. Yeah. So just kind of circling back to the Four Freedoms, I mean, we sort of see these all as being kind of interdependent, right? And all related. But each year we have sort of chosen a pillar to sort of orient our explorations around. And this year and into next, we're really kind of zeroing in on this idea of healing and listening and the connection between them. And also the connections to justice and awakening as well. And as part of that, I created a project with an incredible artist and world builder named Tony Patrick. And our project is called the School of Lived Experience. And we actually just launched a podcast. And I'll share the info with Lisa so you guys can check it out on Spotify or on Apple. But it's really about how to cultivate aliveness and compassion in the everyday, and how do we do this through a creative lens. So it's been really exciting, and part of the project is being activated at Four Freedoms' exhibition in New York City right now at Fotografiska. We have taken over the elevator, the passenger elevator, and turned it into a kind of soundscape place for relaxation and calm. And the show on View 2 is all about the concept of listening and how listening impacts the way we connect and relate to the world around us. So please check it out.
So should we open up to Q&A now?
I think
Sure.
that is a perfect thing to do. We had a couple of questions, but I think you kind of answered them. in the Q&A, how did you face someone discouraging and convince them to join? I think that is part of, like you said, inviting people in. Does anybody else have questions? You can either drop it in the chat or you can put it in the Q&A. And I'm kind of curious what's next beyond Photographica and beyond the School of Lived Experience. Are you focusing on different values next year, or what are the plans?
Well, like next year, if we stick with our theme, next year will be the hardest year, at least for me, because we'd be focusing on deep listening. So
is that a challenge for you, Hank?
What'd you say?
Is that a challenge for you?
I mean, I don't think I'm the only person it's a challenge for, but it is. I mean, that's the critical.
It's a challenge for everyone, for sure.
Yeah,
you
agreed.
know, I don't know if everyone's as afraid of acknowledging that challenge as I am. Because this idea of like, I think it says maybe somewhere in one of our many things we wrote, listen until you hear, from maybe the Another Justice campaign. And this acknowledgement that like listening does not equate hearing.
Absolutely.
And deep listening requires a release of ego, in a sense, a release of myself, and while also embracing a love for whatever is being shared with me, however it's being shared with me by whoever. That training is, I think, a lot of what most spiritual practices and religious practices espouse, but even many of the people who study that struggle in that space. So I'm excited to be like, Michelle, you're not listening. You're not hearing me.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much love and joy in really leaning in and being able to be there for someone. And if you think about times in which you truly felt seen and heard, I mean, it's powerful, and if you could nourish that power,
Who could?
it could be incredibly.
If
If we
who?
could, if we.
No, if who?
If me.
Yeah, so say it again.
If
First
I,
person.
if I could nourish that power, it would be the ripple effect that would have collectively would be unprecedented.
Did it feel different to say it in the first person?
Yeah. I'm so used to talking in the we's,
Yeah. We're also used to talking for other people. If you do this, you're gonna feel this. And if we do that.
Yeah.
But also I think there's a question about how do you guys set up criteria for collaboration among artists, especially different racial backgrounds, or do you let them dictate that on each project? What do you have to say to that?
Setting up criteria. I mean, this is a hard one, because we're constantly breaking our own rules, right? Or bending them or expanding them.
Rules always change.
I think the rules are always change. Yeah. And I think our sort of ethos has always been to invite everybody in. And that certainly presents challenges because people they don't always see eye to eye. And they also we don't always know how to work together in spite of our differences and our struggles. So I think part of what we value about collaboration is kind of like that messy, sticky, challenging piece of like, how do you bring people together in spite of, X, Y, and Z? And we've even had to deal with that amongst, our own team, right? Like, how do we come together when people aren't feeling seen, aren't feeling heard, aren't feeling valued?
Even when that person is supposedly the person in charge, right? Because in the leaderful organization, or as I like to call it, leaderful disorganization, there is a lot of cats scrambling or chickens scrambling, and the consensus is made in the cacophony, and that's where I think the listening until you hear becomes powerful, because we all eventually catch the tune and catch the rhythm, catch the beat, but in the midst of it, it just like sounds chaotic and crazy. Most of us are of different ethnicities. We have probably a different perspective of race than 21st century would have, or especially the 19th century would have described. But also, as we even learn more about our own ethnicities, we are invited to like see ourselves in more complex ways, and also see the interconnectivity of them all. And that's something that I think is a dance, because none of us wants to judge a book by its cover, but all of us go about putting on covers and make us judged in a way that we believe to be fairly, and then judge others in that way. And so even when I would be invited to describe myself physically, I like to say I'm a rainbow, because most of my existence is interior. It is not on the surface of my skin. And that's something that other people experience all the time with me, but like I can't relate to that as far as like my own identity being defined by the barriers. I like to believe that I am you, Michelle, and there are moments when I wish I had the courage that you had, the strength that you have, and try to wear my Michelle cape or mask.
You're being very nice, but I think what you're pointing out is so important, because I think that really the only criteria for collaboration is like getting to know someone, right? Like, how do you make something with someone without taking time to peel back those layers, both from yourself, right? From that cover that you put on that Hank refers to, but how do you see beyond your own judgments of others? And how do I see past my own judgments of others? And I think opening the space to be vulnerable and to accept that I don't know everything, I think has been really the one constant, I think, in terms of collaboration.
And also, like, I think you and I have had experiences where even after working super closely for 7 years, where we realized that we aren't the same people that we were. I'm not the same person I was. You weren't the same person that you were when I met you. And also acknowledging and allowing space for the other person to grow, and creating space for them to see how you've grown or changed is something that's also critical to keeping collaboration alive and healthy.
Sometimes your collaborators tell you things you're not ready to hear, but you need to hear. Hank is very good at telling me things I'm not ready to hear yet.
Well, you're good. You're really good at not hearing me until you're ready. Margaret asks, thank you, Hank and Michelle, for this transformative work and conversation. I'm a Bandung resident and working on a social practice installation, Afro-Asian Poetic Pantry of Solidarities. And your conversation has been informing and helpful as a model. I wondered if you both can share on your practices of collaboration with other artists and activists who contributed, and specifically if there was compensation for contributing artists. My smaller scale project will also have invited artists and activists into the installation, and I'd like to provide modest compensation, and I've wondered if both of you could share your practices and approaches. Thanks again. And then another person said, Ten Ya Wu, said, what kind of advice would you give your younger artist selves?
That's a good one.
Well, you went to art school.
I would
How about the
say-
story of coming to New York?
I would say lean in. I mean, this is going to sound maybe a little cheesy, but it's something that I feel like I'm learning every day, is like leaning into the unknown and the fear, especially as an artist, you know, where quote unquote success is not guaranteed. And you know, you're constantly encouraged to innovate. And you're often valued and objectified based on the sort of end product of what you're making. I think this collaboration for freedoms has helped me to see and to help me to see beyond these constraints that I've put on myself that were restricting my ability to see clearly, see myself clearly, and also to take risks. And some of the scariest moments during this project also mark the times in which I learned the most. So if I had to give my younger self advice, it would be to lean in, even when it feels really scary and uncertain.
Are you open to sharing anything about your experience in coming to New York as were you 18 or 17-year-old artist?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I moved here at the end of here. I moved to New York. I do not live in New York anymore.
From
So used to
Seattle.
saying that. Yeah, from Seattle. At the end of 2002 to be a painter. And
as a young American woman, what was that experience?
so it was pretty rough. It created a huge rift within my family. Nobody understood what I was doing. Nobody supported what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing, but I convinced everyone that I did in order to feel better about my decisions. And it propelled me on this trajectory I never could have expected. And I thought of, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of the younger artists in the audience are much smarter than I was, but you know, I went to a very traditional art school, and you know, I'd sit in 6-hour life drawing classes and color theory classes and stuff. And you know, I had a specific idea around what an artist was, you know, and as I started working in the arts, and as this project started to take shape, I realized that art is literally everything. So yeah.
And related, thank you for sharing that, Michelle. When the question about compensation that Margaret asked, yes, we realized after how long, a couple of years, that it was critical to compensate ourselves, which was kind of like something that's not uncommon for artists to put themselves less and after their art. But we also have always found ways to pay artists for something, and it can be as little as $100 and as much as $25,000. And that where there's a will, there's a way, and we are currently at the stage of like discerning, like, great, we can. I think there are probably 50 artists that we were able to facilitate awards of over $25,000 to in the past year and a half. How the heck did we do that? Because we didn't do it on purpose. And so like, because we didn't come from a business background, we came from an arts background, right? And so when we get to collaborate with Google, collaborate with Converse, and other kind of organizations and foundations, it's crazy what can happen, but we don't know how to tell our story, right? So like, as I even look through the images and think about what we've done, and how like the willingness of people to like play with us regardless of like the amount, is something that's critical, because they realize that the value is infinite. Like if they make a billboard of their own work with us, that they can make a whole world out of it in their own way, and that has happened many times, or similar with another project. So I think that's something that we do, but I think we do at our own peril every year, because almost every year we're like, oh, we don't have any more money, what are we going to do? And then we start over. But 2024 is going to be a critical year for everyone to come in, and so I hope that people who supported us and people we've supported are willing to do that with us again. But Justine asked, are there any projects, or Amy asked, are there any projects that you wish you could go back to because they weren't complete and you've grown and evolved from? I would say for me, the Question Bridge Black Males, which is a video mediated megalog between African American men that I worked on with another collective that is somewhat part of For Freedoms, and exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum and many other places. It was never meant to stop at Black males. It was really meant to kind of create the connections across gender and ethnic identities. And so it feels very incomplete to me. And also the Truth Booth, which I showed some images of, In Search of the Truth, was another project where it's a modern day confession booth. And we took it to 35 states in 2016, and 13 states in Mexico in 2020. But like, the road to the truth is less traveled.
That's quite a statement, Hank. So I think we're gonna end on that note. But I want to thank you both so much for sharing this time today. And we will be making this recording available on our website and on the MoCADA site for other people who weren't able to join us tonight. So our residents will stay on, but everybody else, thank you for joining us tonight. And we appreciate you attending.